Alright, let's get started. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. Much appreciated. My name is Robert. Today I'm going to be talking about Afrofunk music. It's not going to be an exhaustive presentation. It's going to last about an hour, hour and a half or so, and I'm going to cover just sort of a general overview of what is Afrofunk music, who are some important Afrofunk artists. So let's begin just with sort of a general overview. What is Afrofunk? Well, it's a popular musical genre that emerged out of West Africa in the 1920s. The popular commercial genre itself is about 100 years old, but of course it has roots in music that is much, much older. It blends traditional polyrhythmic African music with North American jazz and funk music. And polyrhythm just means many rhythms stacked on top of each other. Afrofunk music typically features large bands, often many musicians, and you can see that in the picture there on the side. They often use chanting vocals in the lyrics, typically many musicians playing many different instruments more percussively than melodically. And that even happens to be true with typical melodic instruments. And of course, like I said, complex rhythmic patterns. So these are some of the Afrofunk artists that I'm going to be talking about today. Like I was saying, it's not an exhaustive list. There definitely are other important artists too, but for the sake of time, we can only talk about a few. I'm going to be talking about Fela Kuti, William Antibalas, and Pax Nicholas, who were all actually from Africa themselves. As well, I'll be talking a little bit about how Afrofunk music expanded out beyond the continent. So I'll be talking a little bit about Osibisa and Antibalas too. So let's start off with Fela Kuti. Fela Kuti was born in 1938 and he died in 1997, and today he's remembered as one of the most popular Afrofunk artists of all time. He was a multi-instrumentalist, probably best known for playing the saxophone, but of course as well he was also a vocalist, and you can see in the picture there that he's using the microphone. Aside from performing as an instrumentalist, he was also a band leader. He was the leader of at least three big Afrofunk bands, Africa 70, Nigeria 70, and Africa 80, or Egypt 80, and he was also a composer. He did the majority of the songwriting, for his Afrofunk roots. And so today his name is so synonymous with Afrofunk music. It's sort of like how Bob Marley has become so synonymous with reggae music. You can see here a picture on the side of some of the albums that Fela released during his life. His music was often political, and he tended to advocate for social change, which sometimes more authoritarian governments didn't always like. And it's not like I chose these records to be sort of in line with the current political climate or what's happening in the news nowadays. These records, they just happen to be a reflection of the current climate that Fela saw going on in the world at the time. So for example, the album at the very bottom is called Why Black Man They Suffer. Some of his statements were more direct. So for example, the album that's up at the very top there, Zombie, that was Fela's comment on government oppression and government police. He said that the government military was very much like made of zombies, just people who would do whatever you were told, people who wouldn't think for themselves, yes men, basically. So Fela, he also did a lot to try and expand Afrofunk music outside of Africa. He collaborated with Western musicians like Ginger Baker, who is of course best known from playing with Cream, and Eric Clapton and Blind Faith. And for all the positives of Fela Kuti, he's a bit of a polarizing figure. He's a bit divisive because he infamously ran a commune on his property. He was supposedly a ruthless band leader, keeping really, really strict control over his musicians and the music that they were playing. So let's listen to an example of Fela Kuti's music. If anyone has any comments, anything they want to say, Of course, you can just please write it in the chat. Okay, so moving on, going forward. Pax Nicholas. So Pax Nicholas was a member of Fela's band. The music that we're going to hear from him is very similar to the music that we just heard. Supposedly that he released 2 albums in his life, or rather the Nettie family released 2 albums in their career, but unfortunately one of them seems to be lost. This is the only album of theirs that we still have today, Na Teeth, No Devo of Teeth, and it's actually even pretty lucky that we have this album at all, because allegedly the way that the story goes is that Fela himself was so intimidated by the strength and the quality of this music that he became jealous and supposedly said to Pax Nicholas, never play that music again. And then later on, when the Nettie family was trying to decide what to do with their recordings, they got into a fight, and supposedly the master tapes were all destroyed. So the only reason why this album in particular survived was that a tourist happened to find a copy for sale in a record store, and I think it was in Ghana, but it was definitely somewhere in Africa. And they brought it back to Europe with them. And then they made what's called a second generation master by scanning the waveform from the disc and then pressing new LPs with that scanned waveform. So let's listen to the first song from this album. Again, like I was saying, very similar to Fela's music. It'll be densely polyrhythmic, lots of rhythms stacked on top of each other, quite a large band of musicians, lots of melodic instruments being used percussively, and the song structure itself will be quite similar to Fela's music. So a long introduction, lots of long instrumental passages with extended solos, definitely inspired by jazz harmonies, jazz melodies. Okay. So, a lot of similarities there between Pax Nicholas's music and Fela Kuti's music. A lot of the same instrumentation, a lot of the same song structures. But yeah, Pax Nicholas, a little bit more unknown, a little bit more obscure than Fela Kuti. Someone else who was a little bit unknown until relatively recently was this musician, William Onyebor. He was also a native African musician who was composing Afrofunk in the 1970s, but we didn't really start to discover his music in the West until about the early 2000s. So he was born in 1976, and he died relatively recently as well in 2017, also from Nigeria. He's such an extremely mysterious figure because he sort of disappeared entirely from music in the mid-1980s. In Nigeria in the 1970s, he was making a lot of self-produced, self-composed music, using a lot of synthesizers, which was quite unusual for Afrofunk music at the time. Whereas with Fela Kuti or Pax Nicholas so far, we've heard a lot of acoustic instruments, or at least non-synthesizer instruments. I mean, of course, yes, electric bass, yes, electric guitar, but not really like a synthesizer keyboard, like William Onyebor was doing. So he made all this advanced, forward-thinking music in the 1970s, and then he sort of disappeared in the 1980s and stopped making music. And for about 15, 20 years or so, no one really knew anything about him or was paying attention. And then when people started to discover his music in the 2000s, people literally started to ask the question, like it's written here in the picture, who is William Onyebor? So you can see a picture of him here on the right, playing not one, but actually 2 synthesizers, and surrounded by a couple of other synthesizers in this particular studio. Like I was saying, his music, it's a little bit different from some of the other Afrofunk music we've heard so far. It does make a lot of heavy use of synthesizers, and it's a little bit less polyrhythmic, a little bit less dense rhythmically than, say, Fela Kuti or Pax Nicholas. But what is similar to those guys is his lyrical topics and what he chooses to sing about. Many of his songs tend to be rooted in also these ideas of social change or social revolution. So let's listen to one of his songs called Atomic Bomb. All right. So, yeah, quite forward-thinking, quite unique, pretty different from traditional, typical Afrofunk music. So of course, Afrofunk did not stay contained in Africa. It expanded out beyond the continent. Like I already mentioned, Fela Kuti's association, his friendship with Ginger Baker was one of the big reasons for that. That was one of the first big collaborations between a local African musician and then an international um, Western musician or European musician. But of course, many other North American, European artists traveled actually to Africa themselves to go listen to Afrofunk in its native environment. For example, Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder both themselves traveled to Lagos to hear Fela Kuti play live. And so you can see pictures on the side there of the album that Fela and Ginger Baker released together, as well as a picture of Fela and Ginger Baker together. I'm pretty sure this is at a studio in the States. And there were some Western groups, there are indeed some Western groups that try to emulate the sounds of Afrofunk music. One of the groups, the first one I'd like to talk about is this group here, Osibisa. They were formed in London, England in 1969. So they're not actually from Africa themselves, but the musicians are. The musicians are from Ghana and various parts in the Caribbean. They're actually even still active today. So they've been active for a little over 50 years. They've released more than 20 albums. You can see just their first three. The pictures there on the side on the right. And so because of that, they're probably the most successful in terms of being commercially successful and the longest lasting African heritage band. The song that I'm going to play is the first song from their first album. There's a little bit of a spoken word introduction, so I'll just let the vocalist explain what the song is about. But you can also sort of get the idea from their album covers that their music is somewhat influenced by what was going on in Western pop music as well. 1969 was the height of psychedelia, and so for sure, you can see that in their choice of art style. What a great track, especially that flute solo at the end, so good. So here's a picture of Osibisa playing live. And so, like I was saying, you could hear and you can see that there are a lot of similarities between this group and what we think of, I would say, traditional Western pop groups. The way that the band is arranged on stage is pretty typical of Western pop groups. There's sort of the one main drummer at the back, and then you can see off to the right there's some percussion, but definitely nowhere near the same size as what we saw with, say, like Fela Kuti or Pax Nicholas. Their music also tends to be less polyrhythmic than either of those artists or other indigenous Afrofunk music. Although there is definitely some layering going on to create a complex and dense texture. The texture, in my opinion, is a little bit more harmonic than it is rhythmic. And it's pretty easy to count 1, 2, 3, 4, listening to Osibisa's music. Alright, so the last band that we're going to look at today is this group here, Antibalas. You can see a picture of them on the side, as well as them performing right below. And they're actually an American Afrofunk band. They were formed in New York in 1998 by Martin Pena when he was at school. And they're modeled after Fela's Africa 70 band. But they also incorporate other genres like dubstep to sort of expand out their textures and in particular sounds that they use. They're still active today. Their most recent album, The Flu Chronicles, was just released in February 2020, so only a couple months back, super recent. And we're going to take a listen to one of the songs from that album. Okay, so that's that. Thanks very much, everyone, for tuning in and for watching. Much appreciated. If any of you are interested in my slides, this one, as well as many other lectures that I've made about various musicology topics, are available at Teachers Pay Teachers at my store. If you're interested in having me proofread or edit any of your writing, you can find me at Fiverr. As well, you can also read my blog at WordPress, where I'm currently doing a project called Classical Music Doesn't Suck, and it really doesn't. You should check it out. I'm going to start I'm gradually building up a list of many recommendations. What else? Oh, you can follow me on Twitter, where I post music links as well. You can make suggestions or comments of various topics that maybe you'd like to hear. And my MA thesis is available for you to read as well. You can find that through Google Scholar. If you just do a search for Robert McKnight iPod, very easy to find. So enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. I'll be back next week with a new topic. See all of you later.